thumbs up or a, okay? Great. Yeah, as I was saying, I think it's just seeing everybody's work and diligence around putting together a logical framework has been so exciting. And I think for some of us, this is the first time we've ever done a logical framework, right?
Yes.
Like, oh my goodness, but it's actually stirred and stimulated kind of thinking about what are we trying to achieve and how are we going to get there. So I think we're just going to refresh ourselves, refresh our minds as to what the logical framework is, how we use it, and then how we use it to measure impact. Okay? Just so that you know, I think most of the Terry, all the logical frameworks have been printed. Is that right? Mine is somewhere over there.
You guys were sent to us.
Okay. So logical framework, I think, it says a lot already in the name. This is a framework that is logical, that talks about making impact. So right at the top, I think we've all been working on this. We've got our goal. What is that? What is the transformation we're hoping to achieve, right? Whether it's with children, disaster relief, Tijuana, wherever it is, what is that big goal? And I think you're talking about clarity, right? So what is that goal? And I think we need to be very clear that needs to be very well-defined, written down, that long-term, widespread, beyond the life of project goal. And that is the starting place, actually, because from there, everything else makes sense. I think you were talking again, Martina, about strategy, but where are we going? So I think we need to have a compass, we need to have a destination. And from there, we can ask ourselves, well, how do we get there? And this is where the logical framework comes into play, because based on the goal, we then have inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and objectives. Now, for the purposes of today and our logical frameworks, we're just going to look at activities, outputs, and outcomes, right? And, okay, go ahead.
Will you be able to email us this after?
Absolutely, sure.
That would be great. So I see people taking pictures of it, but I'm going to need some documentation.
I'm videoing the whole thing, so.
Do you have permission?
Barbara.
We have to sign a disclaimer.
Okay. Now, I want to make this interactive. And let me ask you, for those who've done the logical framework, how easy or how difficult was it on a scale of 1 to 10? Who found it extremely challenging and you still not sure where you're at with that? Okay, so a few people. How many found it a piece of cake, really easy, took me a short period of time to do this? Okay. Kevin, where do you land?
Where's Noelle?
Where's Noelle?
That's where I land.
Okay. All right.
Is she here?
Noelle, great. She's amazing.
Okay. So this is the form you all had and saw, right? And this is the logical framework template that we've all been using, where we had our goal clearly specified, right? And then from the goal, we worked backwards. We want to see children have the best possible start in life. Wonderful. In order for children to have the best possible start in life, they need to be school ready. Well, how do we get children school ready? Well, there's a number of things that we need to do to get them school ready. We need to help them with reading and mathematics. Okay, in order to have them reading and literate and their math skills are where they need to be, what do we need to do to make sure that those are in place? Well, we need qualified teachers, we need resources, and so from the goal, we can work backwards all the way to the activities we need to make this happen. And so it's a logical framework, and so what we've done here, and hopefully as we go through these today, is we're going to look at these. Do these make sense? Do these activities, plus those risks and assumptions, give us these outputs? In other words, if I do these activities, if I train a teacher, will I have a teacher that is qualified now to educate children? And if I have these outputs plus those assumptions, do I get the outcomes that I'm looking for? Okay? And if I have these outcomes plus those assumptions, do I reach my goal? Now I'm going to go back to this slide, because this tells us that in fact there's two different aspects to the logical framework. There are inputs, activities, and outputs, which are all under monitoring. Okay, this is just telling us what we're doing. And then we've got outcomes and goals, which are actually part of evaluation. This tells us whether we've had any impact or not. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Please stop me if this is new to you or you're not getting it. It's really important that we grasp this.
So it's kind of the before and after.
It's a before and after.
Before, the green is after.
Correct. This is what we're doing, and this is what we're hoping to achieve in
Right.
terms of change.
Yes.
Okay? So this doesn't tell us anything about change. We're just assuming that if I do this, this is what's going to happen. And hopefully we're going to see the results and we reach the goal that we're trying to achieve. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. So this is what hopefully we've all done. From our goal, we've worked backwards and we've said, okay, these are the activities I need to have these outputs, and these outputs plus those assumptions gives me this outcome, and then ultimately I reach my goal. Now, so monitoring, okay, maybe I should ask you this. What is monitoring?
Sure.
We saw that first part, monitoring inputs, activities, and outputs. So what is monitoring?
Tracking what we're doing.
Tracking what we're doing.
It's a lot of numbers,
A lot of
stats.
numbers. Okay.
Results.
Okay. Results.
Question. If every program you develop using that, you would have to be able to monitor it, correct?
Right.
If you can't monitor it, then it's really not a valuable program?
If you cannot monitor something, you cannot measure it.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think this is the principle: is that every program that we design or develop needs to have a monitoring and evaluation
That's
component to
my
it.
point.
Absolutely.
Well, that takes into consideration your business plan too, doesn't it?
Correct.
In the planning of the program. But it gets very, in my mind, that gets very, there's a lot of thought in this process
Correct.
of this monitoring and evaluation.
And in fact, there are a lot of assumptions that are made about this logical framework, and some of them may be erroneous. You think, well, if I do this, it's going to lead to that, it's going to
Yeah.
lead to that, man, I'm going to hit my goal. And as you're actually rolling out the program, you realize, I made some wrong assumptions.
Yeah.
By training that teacher, it didn't actually lead to this child becoming school ready.
Yeah.
So I need to go back to my logical framework. Maybe it wasn't so logical, and I need to revise it. So this is a living document. There will be version 1, 2, 5, 10 as we develop the program. So like Dave was saying, don't be overwhelmed by this. This is a great starting place just to make sure that we are thinking more deliberately about our programs and the goals we're trying to achieve. Okay? So when we think about monitoring, it's the routine collection of data. So if we were to do this training today, Dave was going to report back to Robert on how did it go with the programs team. He could say, well, we did a monitoring and evaluation, training for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it's 15 people. Okay? So Dave's monitoring report back to Robert was 15 people were trained in monitoring and evaluation. Now, does that mean that everybody got it?
No.
Does that mean everybody's going to implement it?
No.
Okay,
Just
so
get it.
this just means that the training took place. That's the same applies for children. We fed 100 children. Well, did their metrics change? Did their anthropometric measurements change? Well, we don't know. We just know that people were trained, children were fed, water filters were distributed. Those are the metrics that fall under monitoring. It's like Nadine was saying, it's the numbers. So it's the routine collection of data. It's daily. I mean, we collect data on a daily basis. If we hold a support group, we will count the number of people that attended the support group. Now, whether it has impacted their lives or not, that's something we look at later. But this is the routine collection of data, and it measures inputs, activities, and outputs. And really it asks us questions, did we do the things we set out to do? Okay? We said we would run support groups, we said we would feed children, we said we would do whatever. Did we do that? Okay? And it's a question of efficiency. Okay? So that's what monitoring is all about. Evaluation is different. Okay? And let me ask you this. How do you understand evaluation? What would be some of the...
Did we do the right things?
did we do the right things? Not did we do things right, but did we do the right things? Okay?
Did we affect the change intended?
Did we have the change we wanted? Did we have that impact? Exactly. You know, we were hoping to see these children that are, you know, doing well in life and succeeding at school and productive citizens. What happened? Is that what we saw? Or whether with the volunteer corps, we've seen volunteers that are, you know, able or capacitated, they know how to run programs, or we see communities that are empowered. Did we get there? And I think that's the question. Now, what's very interesting about monitoring evaluation, the vast majority of NGOs or nonprofits stop measuring at the monitoring level. They never get to the evaluation level. I forget what the numbers are, but about 80 to 90% of nonprofits stop here. They can tell you how many children they've fed, how many volunteers, how many this, how many that, but they find it very difficult to take it to the next level, which is the evaluation. Did we actually have success?
Yeah, that's interesting, Mark, you bring that up, because if we look at it from a corporate standpoint or from a government standpoint, they're more concerned about this right here. Be able to take that monitoring and to evaluate and say, okay, so if you're going to, because we work in medicine, if we're talking about if we're talking about child health, and we're talking about the impact of vitamins and albendazole, parasite medicine on that. Well, we know how many children they are, but actually how to be affected, you know, growth rates, weight change, capacity to sit in a classroom, in measuring that to give the results, that produces a whole lot more revenues than just the monitoring aspect of it.
Well, let me ask you this. If an NGO came to you as a funder and said, man, we fed 10,000 children, and here are the pictures. And another NGO came to you and said, we fed 2,000 children, and because of our feeding, these children are doing so much better, they're performing better at school, they're succeeding in this way, you know. Who would you fund? Who would you fund? The 10,000 or the 2,000 where you've had impact? Well, I think it's a no-brainer, and I think in the corporate world, that's exactly how it operates.
That's what they're looking for.
Exactly. And I think this is where we need to get to, like Dave was saying. This is ultimately to a place where we can measure our impact and say, because of these programs. And I think sometimes we can be a little self-deceived and say, well, I've done all this wonderful work, but we have no idea whether it's had any impact or not.
Right.
And I think this is where we need to get to. So,
Wow.
this isn't something, good.
Habitat changed their M&E work about 5 years ago because Habitat has an amazing direct mail campaigns. Direct mail and direct marketing are very scientific, and if you do A, B, and C, you're going to get D. It's a mathematical equation, really, and they have it down. And what that did is it gave them a lot of unrestricted money, like 150 million a year, unrestricted money, that helped run the corporate office and other stuff. I think in the same way, we have been very privileged, but what it does, it kind of makes you lazy.
Yeah.
Because Habitat can say, we built, renovated, or repaired X number of homes per day. And so everybody's fired up about that. We can say, we served 10,000 children, and the churches will be, amen. But once you start getting into more sophisticated donors, they want to know, okay, what happened when you fed 10,000 children?
Yeah.
And so, just as Habitat got lazy and realized, okay, we need to do more than just say what our inputs have been, but we need to be able to show what kind of outcomes. We're in the same spot.
Exactly.
Where a number of NGOs have found themselves once you start getting some more sophisticated grants or sophisticated donors. And, you know, for us to increase the revenue pie, it's not going to be from the churches. there's gonna be, we're gonna have to go after more high net worth people. We're gonna have to go after some grants, and that's gonna require more. So, anyway.
And we've got to answer the question, so what? So you fed 10,000 people, so what? You trained so many teachers, so what? You ran X number of Saturday academies, so what? You mobilized 10,000 volunteers, so what? You built whatever, so what? And we shouldn't be defensive about it. I think we need to say, well, because of that, this is what we've been able to achieve. And so I think we need to move into the space. And
you know, it's interesting, Mark, though, too, in a lot of our programs, we're doing that. And I'm thinking about my own programs right now. I think about, for an example, you have someone Eli Lilly is interested in funding diabetes. So we're dealing with diabetes patients in Central America. We have very strong outpatient clinics and monitoring. But the thing is, we don't have the numbers to show that impact. You know, and that makes it a huge difference if we want to write a grant for diabetes for Central America. That could be $50,000 for the monitoring of diabetes with this control group. I mean, it's just the potential.
We do
is
have
just
the numbers, but we don't have them where we can use them.
we don't have
Which is the
well, the
major
specific.
difference.
and we're going to be talking about that in a minute.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to collect the data, it's
Yeah.
another thing to
Exactly.
access it, to analyze it, and
Yeah.
to turn it into something that,
Exactly. Yeah.
So I just wrote a Lego Foundation grant. They were looking for 3 nonprofits around the world that they could give a huge grant to around play and the importance of play. And the criteria were, what is your logical framework? Okay, so they wanted this. And give evidence of at least 2 to 3 studies that shows that your program has had an impact.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how many nonprofits just went, oh, well, I don't know. I've got my outputs, I've got all my numbers,
Yeah.
but I don't have evidence. And so this is where the foundations, the US government, they are looking for people that can show impact in their programs. And if we're not playing at that space, sure, we'll have the church leaders saying, well done, and the church member, but we need to move it. And I think even for, Jesus had impact.
Yeah, we didn't know that.
Jesus had impact. He didn't just, oh, I fed 5,000. That's a good number. Fantastic. I mean, he was constantly looking for, not the numbers, he was looking for heart change, for followers, and so I think in the same way, we need to be mindful of that. Now, not all of us can measure impact, and so this is where sometimes, you can do it internally. It's called operational evaluation, where you can build into your program, which is not difficult to do. Or you can get an external person once a year, or a consultant, to come alongside and say, let me help you with your evaluation. But that does take money. And so we just need to be thinking about these things. So, just some...
And a lot of you get good outside evaluation from universities that grad students are looking for. They need something like this for their dissertations. So it's universities are a perfect place to get external evaluators.
There's a sister called Beth Radcliffe who she's just retired, and they're coming down to South Africa and Southern Africa. She's an expert in early childhood development research. Wow. So we're going to hold on to her for a couple of months. We're going to send her our data, the before and after. So I started with the child, I measured the child, and we fed the child. Those are the outputs. But now we want to know whether that feeding has actually helped the child. And so she's got the skill sets to look at the before and after and run some analysis on that to show. And the answer may be that we had 0 impact. Is that a bad thing if you find out that you've had 0 impact?
Could be.
It could be that we've had 0 impact. And sometimes Thierry will tell us that, in fact, your intervention has caused more harm than good.
Yeah.
So the fact that we get a negative result is actually not a bad thing, because it actually helps us learn. Otherwise, we can pat ourselves on the back and say, look at all this amazing work we've done. And so some of the benefits of monitoring evaluation, I think they speak for themselves. But I do want to focus on this corner one here. And I forget who mentioned it, but and I'm sure Dave would agree with this, I think we need to strive to be a learning organization.
Yes.
Mhm.
Amen.
That is one of our values, that we are a learning organization.
Yes.
Because the moment we get stale, the moment we think we know it all, because the church is applauding, I think that's when we deceive ourselves. And I think I've seen a lot of nonprofits actually go downhill because they stop learning and stop staying committed. Sorry.
A phrase that has been going around for the past few years is called groupthink.
Yes.
And I think in our churches, pre-2003 and even a little bit beyond, we were in groupthink.
Yeah.
We felt like we could do things better no matter what it was, and even in hope,
Yes.
If disciples do it, they'll do it better. But if you don't get constant external inputs, then you're participating in groupthink, which is not good.
Well, the corporate world demands it. It's not even an option, because they're changing weekly, monthly, yearly on all of the way they're running their business from philanthropic
Right.
understanding. And we have to keep pace with that market if we're gonna get to the place where we're generating the dollars that we need to fund our programs.
Yeah. And in fact, if you look at corporate funding of corporate social responsibility funding, over the years it was all about checkbook philanthropy. I give you some money.
Yeah.
You send me some nice pictures, and
Yeah.
we're all happy.
Okay,
We put it in the annual bulletin. What corporates are realizing now is that doing good is good for business.
Yeah.
So it's no longer a fringe activity.
Right.
It's actually part of their strategy.
That's right.
They want to be seen as a good corporate citizen. They want to be seen, and in fact, it helps with employee retention and sense of value and purpose and so on. So they are no longer looking at for the nice pictures. They're saying, what is the return on investment when I give money to Hope
And
Hawaii?
it's very specialized.
Very specialized. Yeah. What is in it for us? There's enlightened
That's
self-interest
the
here.
question, yeah.
And I think we've got to understand that, because there are so many of those beggar bowls going around saying, "Help us," and they've all got the same pictures as you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They've all got the needy child, and and so what's going to distinguish us and differentiate us from the rest of the pack? And that's going to be, look at the impact we're having. Yes, look at the 1,000 NGOs doing good work, but what distinguishes us is, look at the impact we're having long term.
I just wanted to make a comment too, and then this is probably a parking lot idea, but because of the healthcare network we're setting up, we get college students saying, "I'm looking for a project." We've got a master's in public health student that I've sent to Kenny and Cornelia looking for a project, and so I'd like to figure out a way to connect our needs with students looking for projects, to be that connection. I'm not sure exactly how to do that. I just want to bring it up because you're exactly right. There are students who need and want worthy, take notes, talk, and put this up.
You're amazing.
Find the marker.
And you can imagine how many disciple college students would love to take what they've learned and help us on this. If we just find it.
Can I give you an example of that, Kevin, of what you're saying? If we take Central America, we started this children nutritional program, which is basically parasite medicine and vitamins. So we've been doing this now for, I think, maybe 4 to 5 years. We have all that data. We measured the height, we measured the weight prior to the parasite medicine, prior to the vitamins, and we can look back 5 years later and see their new height, their new weight, and the impact we've had, and we can measure that. We have the information, so to have a student that we could align with us, to give them all this data, we could produce some incredible results.
I'll have them go compile it.
Compiling the data and putting it together.
But we have so many public health students out there that this wouldn't be difficult for them. A student t-test, the Stata, EpiInfo, there's free software out there that I think they would love to jump in and help like that. So I think we need to start looking for these opportunities with universities and different folk. Even Shane, putting it on the website. Hey, we've got some data that needs to be analyzed. Who can help? You know, we've got before and after data. And they may come back to you and say your data is actually not clean data. Now, we've had a situation where our data is not clean. It means it wasn't gathered or collected in the right way. So we needed to go back and improve on our data collection tools in order for somebody to analyze this. So this is part and parcel of what we do and what we can aspire to. But it's just really important. And we can build this into any program that we have, regardless of what it is. Now, so one of the big questions is, what do we do with all this information? Now, I'm going to actually jump to this. We're gonna discuss this afternoon after the presentations, but I just want us to think about these questions. Think about your own program, and firstly, is our data accurate? So when Mark says he has fed 23,123 children, would you take my word for it?
Well, I want to see how you came to that number.
But if I said that right now, I've reached 23,123 children, how would you feel about that?
Well, we trust you.
You trust me, right?
Well, because it's you.
Right.
More or less.
Yeah.
Más o menos.
If it was Mark Martina, I'm
Well,
not sure I would.
let me tell you this. The US government, when you report any data, and Linda can testify to this,
Show me the sheets.
they are going to audit your data, your numbers.
Yep.
Just the way they'll audit your finances, they are going to audit your data. And they will perform what's called a data quality audit, and they'll ask you to start with an internal one, and then they will come with their specialists, and they will say, all right, here are your 23,000. I see you've got a Walter, okay. Please pull up his file. Okay, there's Walter. Let's go see Walter. And they go, Walter, yeah, he used to live here 5 years ago. Oh, it says here that he was fed 2 years ago. Where's Walter? And they'll audit your data. And so, again, from an integrity perspective, whether we are audited or not, we've got to be able to verify our data and justify it. And so this is one of the questions, is, how are we collecting our data? What are the tools and processes that we're using? And again, please don't be intimidated by this. These are just questions that we need to answer. And it may take a while to get there, but this is where we need to get to. Do we have an indicator protocol? So if we were to ask everyone in this room, what is a volunteer? How many different definitions do you think we would get?
As many as there are in this room.
Wouldn't we? Right? Mm-hmm. So we need to, the indicator protocol is a tool that we use to define the indicator. So when we say 1,000 volunteers helped around the world, we all understand what a volunteer is. This is not a person that, looked in on the program, this person came and they worked X number of hours or did whatever. Okay, and the protocol also stipulates how you gather that information and when you report on it. Okay, we're not going to get into the detail of it, but it's just important that we all agree on the definitions. When we say a person served, so for instance, if I serve Walter today, and I serve him tomorrow, and I serve him the next day, how many people have I served?
That was not a great question.
One.
I've only served one
person.
But how many times?
But how many times? I've served him 3 times.
3.
But what we often see is this double counting where I actually count Walter 3 times because I've served him 3 times. And then when we look at the data, we see there's a problem. And we've actually overinflated the numbers. Okay, so it's just something to think about.
It's a very interesting question, because we deal with this with community service brigades, because we're seeing the number of the same patients over and over again.
Right.
So how do you quantify that? Because you still perform a service. So in my mind, I think of it as not so much a patient, but a patient consultation.
Exactly.
So it can be a patient consultation, but not necessarily a patient. We didn't see these number of patients, we saw this number, we had this number of patient consultations.
So we report on, say, the children fed, 23,000, but in fact, because we did it over a year, it was 4 million meals.
Yeah.
You see the difference?
Yeah.
So it's not 4 million children, it's 4 million meals
Right.
serving 23,000 children.
Yeah.
But a common mistake that a lot of nonprofits make is they confound the service with the individual. And then you get this huge number and it doesn't look right. So,
Mark, what if you're looking at different program perspectives? For example, maybe in the disaster world, a child was at a school getting a service from Spartan Pet for 6 weeks. We also, in a completely different program focus, might have helped that family with their home. But the child was a member of that home. Was that child served once or twice? Twice.
okay, so that's a good point. So what we do is we mention the child's name and then the disaggregated services. So the child was helped with education, they were helped with nutrition. So our database, and again, this is something that we'll speak to Shane and the team about, is what kind of database do we need to be able to capture multiple services, multiple individuals in a way. So that may be at the country level, at the program level, and then it's aggregated and sent to head office. But we make very sure that we are not double counting children. We may be counting them across a range of services. Melinda will tell you the US government expects for a child to be served, they have to be served every quarter with at least one service. So if I do quarter 1, I serve them quarter 2, and I skip quarter 3, for all intents and purposes, that child was never served.
Wow.
Because there needs to be a minimum of services over the course of a period in order for the child to benefit from that service, if that makes sense.
So but that's more driven by the donor.
By the donor,
funder
yeah,
than it is.
yeah. Now, what I do want to say is for many of our programs, there is best practice around monitoring evaluation. So I'm sure Charles and you guys have looked at, Red Cross, their M&E framework, children's programs, community service brigades. I mean, there's stuff out there. So I think it's always good to go back and look at what is the benchmark.
And we're gonna, we're taught not to pat ourselves on the back and say how awesome we are. But anything we do, we always have to keep in mind a marketing aspect. Because we're expecting donors to give us their money. So whenever you're doing a program, you can't just think of the social service you're providing, but how can I market this? Because I want it to grow, and if I don't get more money, it's not going to grow. So for example, with Spark, saying that we serve in Ventura, we serve 100 children. Okay. But you can also dissect it, how many hours were they taught? How many, other things that would really tell the full story of what we're doing. But you have to think through, okay, how can I, because a lot of times, in the social service work, we just want to do the social service. But everything we do has to have a marketing component because we want to be able to make it as easy as possible for the fundraisers to help us. Right. And the better we can show that. So, please always keep the marketing understanding. How can this fundraiser sell this program? And it's not selfish and it's not wrong. I mean, that's just the way it is.
And just to add to that, I think a lot of the donors that especially the corporates that we're speaking to, they're looking for corporate community on-ramps for their volunteers, for their staff. So if you can start, as Dave was saying, how do you market it in such a way, we can help your staff connect with the community in these practical ways. And we can even measure that, we can measure their impact, and you've got a corporate that's, sold. I mean, they're going to be, wow, no one else can offer us that. So I think that is a great point. Did you want to add something?
Well, it was just, because this came up, I called Dave actually after talking to Barbara because we were doing our year in review, and it's really outcomes. It's not I mean, it's just measuring things and what outputs. And so one of the things was number of volunteer hours. Well, you know, that could be all over the place, but it seems like that we as an organization that's one thing we need to standardize. Do we count it? And if we do, how do you count it? And that certainly doesn't say anything about impact. I mean, so you had 100,000 volunteers put in, you know, 400,000 volunteer hours.
Yeah.
So what?
Exactly.
So, but you know that.
And we're going to get there.
Yeah.
We'll definitely get there. Just a couple of other quick questions to ask is, does everybody know the difference between quantitative data and qualitative data? Quantity is obviously all the metrics, all the numbers, right? So the question we need to ask is, what type of data should we collect, should we report on?
Both.
We should both. So for instance, for some donors, they want the heartsy, feely, you know, whatever, and that's the qualitative data, right? The good news stories. This family was suffering and they were struggling and they were food insecure. And today they're able to eat a healthy, you know, at least one healthy meal a day. And this is versus the quantitative data, which is just the numbers, you know, number of children fed, number of children educated, number of whatever is water filters. What are the good news stories? What are those life-changing stories that we can add? And so I think this is a question for us and global is to, you know, when we create this database, is what are those stories that get uploaded as life-changing? What is the criteria for a noteworthy and newsworthy story that we'd like to add?
And that's something I think we're pretty good at,
Yeah.
because that's what the churches want.
Stories.
But they want stories, and some donors want that. But if we're going to increase the pie of revenue, you know, we've got to have qualitative data as well.
I want, for TJ, and I don't know if this is the time or this is a parking lot discussion as well. For Tijuana, as an example, as you're building the center, and you're talking about early childhood development, if you go down through Tijuana, you'll notice all those manufacturing facilities. Many of them are medical. And with the kind of data that we could have, you'd be able to sit down in front of a presentation from one of those companies and help fund the children's program that you want to build at the center and allow for their volunteers. I mean, it's kind of like almost a no-brainer in so many ways to open that door. But it's right here. You got the rows and rows of all these manufacturers, in particular for early childhood development, tied into the nutritional program. I mean, I'm kind of like drooling, kind of going, wow, that would be awesome to go in there with all this data, you know? Anyway, I wanted just before I forgot to mention that to you, something to think about.
Great. Two?
Okay, so pre-test, post-test, 23% of students, students showed a 23% increase in self-confidence. That would be qualitative, even though we have
No.
numbers. That's quantitative.
quantitative.
Qualitative refers to the lifestyle change, the improvements in, how can I put
Health
this?
status.
Wouldn't that be
Outlook.
But wouldn't that be both though? Yeah,
It can be,
because there's
but anything that measures change over time from a numerical perspective is
Right.
a quantitative change measure. So you measured the kids, and there was, I don't know how many kids, I forget what the numbers were. You measured them again after your academy or your work, and 23%, there was a 23% improvement, is that right? But that was a measurement. So even though, yes, their self-confidence is a qualitative indicator, the fact that you've measured change over time is a quantitative measure.
okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Mark, tell me, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but with qualitative, on the one end, you have the nice pictures, and you have the story of Jose and how he's been helping with his family. Quantitative, all you got is a bunch of numbers. This is, and then as you go toward the middle, it can be qualitative or quantitative. You know, so
Yeah.
so it's not just there's either this is A or B. It could be A or B, or it could be a mixture.
And it's often both. So we had a child, I'll give you an example. We had a child that was going to, was in first grade, and was skipping meals every day, almost, because the family didn't have the food. We introduced a feeding program, and we helped this family, and we measured this child's metrics, and they improved. Okay. This child went from skipping meals to skipping a grade because her brain kicked in, and she went from
Yeah.
first grade
There you
to
go.
third
Yeah,
grade.
exactly.
So the qualitative aspect is she improved, her brain function improved, family was excited, and she jumped a grade. Does that make sense? The quantitative is she went from a low BMI to a normal BMI. So that's quantitative. We can actually measure. She started at this point and she went. The qualitative and exciting, the story, the good news is that because of that improvement, family was excited, and now she's doing so well at school. So they often do they go hand in hand. It's not.
So is qualitative mostly anecdotal?
Not necessarily anecdotal. It can often be. It's not looking back. It can actually be predicted going forward. So let me ask you this: how do you measure hope?
Both ways.
The organization or?
No, I'm talking about the sense of hope.
We don't
Sense of hope.
So does it have to do
It's
with the
perception.
tool that you're using is?
Exactly. So let me explain. So this quantitative is generally measured through metrics, measurements, and so on. Qualitative, if we sat around the room and said, okay, how many of us are feeling a little bit apprehensive about this meeting? And Barbara raises her hand, whatever. And then after a week of togetherness and unity and all that, we ask the same question at the end. How many of us are feeling so much more unified? And everybody says, absolutely. Does that clarify? So it's more about the good news story. It's about the social transformation. It's about the outlook, how perspectives have changed. It's about how we're feeling. It's about the emotion of the despair and changing into hope. It's more of that. Quantitative is more, I did a measurement here. It could be around self-confidence, and then I took it again here, and I've noticed a change in time. So there's a numerical change. Now the 23%. Let me just answer something. Some people will say, I did this, and then I did this a little later, and I saw a 50% change between baseline and follow-up. But statistically, that change is not significant. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we cannot attribute the benefit to your program.
Right.
So for instance, we've done some data analysis where we looked at the relationship between a mother and her child, and even though there was a change,
Right.
the statistical analytical tool said the change, yes, it's there, but it's not significant. It could have been
Right. Other factors.
Something.
other factors that create. So we have to prove statistical significance to attribute now
Right.
to our program. So that, anyway, I don't want to get technical about that, and that's something for the evaluators to do, but it's just something to recognize. Sometimes we will see a change
Right.
and we'll attribute it to our program, but if we actually do proper analysis of it,
Right.
we'll actually find out that it wasn't necessarily due to our program.
And it has to do with integrity as well.
Yeah.
Because like a volunteer gets baptized after a volunteer corps, well that's great, but was it really because of volunteer
Right.
corps? Or were they almost ready to get baptized before they went on the trip?
Right.
So it has to do with our integrity as well.
I'll give you another crazy example. We brought in 200 water filters into Mozambique last week. And they're targeting a certain community. We know there's about 10 partners in that community. If water hygiene improved in that community, could we say that was definitely because of her? No. There's another 10 partners in there, and we don't even know if the water filters got there.
Right.
So, we've got to be very careful that from an attribution perspective that we're not saying, wow, it's
Yeah.
us. It's thanks to us.
Well, you can say we helped contribute.
We
to
helped
that.
contribute to
Contribute.
that.
Exactly.
So that's how, so that's just another thing when we're looking at data. Was there a question?
Right. Well, quality is more related to the outcome, where we measure the quality, and I think some people may ask, how do we measure quality? But we actually can quantify quality.
Yes.
It could be perceptions. For example, we've done some disaster preparedness programs. How do we measure, are people really prepared for disaster? Do we wait for disaster to measure that? Or we do a survey to measure perceptions? And then we can quantify that 80% of people students that we help feel they are better prepared. We can measure teachers that they feel they are better prepared. So we can quantify, use numbers 0 to 10, and measure the percentage of perceptions and other things to quantify the quality
Right.
Yeah.
to prove it.
Right.
Just, I'm not going to belabor this, but qualitative survey measurements generally involve interviews, one-on-ones, focus group discussions. Those are the kinds of things. Quantitative is a strict measurement. You do something at baseline. How much knowledge does Laurie have about amoebiasis or tapeworms? Okay, and how to treat it. We measure that at baseline. We train her, and then we follow up and say, oh, well, no, she scored 100%. There was a significant change. So that's quantitative. So let's leave that for now. The other question we need to answer is who actually needs this information?
Right.
Is it the donor? Is it the foundation? Is it Robert? Is it Dave? Dave's doing a presentation in a month's time, and he needs to know. He's speaking to a big corporate. So who actually needs this information? Who are the stakeholders? What are they looking for? Is it the heartsy, wow, children are happy, families are doing better, volunteers are excited about the program? Or is it impact? Or is it numbers?
Right.
So those are things we need to know. And how often do they need this? Is it once a year? Is it quarterly? Our program with the US government expects a weekly data report.
Oh my
Weekly.
goodness.
Wow.
Weekly. And we capture data. I get a report on a daily basis of our program. Daily. Every single day, the field workers are reporting to the supervisors, who are reporting to the program manager.
Wow.
And on my WhatsApp, I get a little update. Our target was 100 families. We scored 80, and the reasons we didn't hit the target was because of this, and this.
And my guess is that what you have to report on a weekly basis, maybe monthly in this way, but you have to report your budget of your program to your actual, and then your metrics that you have as your goal to the actual metrics, and then your actual spending to your actual metrics, and they will slice and dice all of that.
Oh, we have to report burn rates, target versus actuals, budget versus targets. So, hang on, you spent 90% of your money, but you've only made 60% of your reach. Why is that? So, anyway, that's just some.
Mark, on this one too, I think even at, other than the corporate level that you got, the government level you're talking about, I think in our donor stewardship for individual donors, this is critical. That we're providing that information on a timely basis. And I guess that depends upon the donor themselves. Do they want it monthly? Do they want it 3 times a year, 4 times a year? Do they want it in a quantitative type of information, or do they want a combination of both? But I think these things are so important in individual fundraising as they are, which most of us are engaged in individual fundraising, as they are at the corporate level or at the government level.
Put yourself in the shoes of a donor and ask that exact question. Wouldn't you prefer, you don't have to extract the information, somebody's actually, giving you this information, and so-and-so is doing so much better, and these families are doing so much better. So, Shane?
I just want to share from the communications and marketing perspective what Dave mentioned. It's really exciting when people are able to tie and have a really simple connection between their donation and the impact. And this is what helps to do that. So I think, and the better we can do that collectively, I think also sends a message not just per program, but as an organization as a whole. And so I think it's exciting that we're all kind of getting on the same page, because as you report individually, we will also be supporting collectively.
Exactly.
And that makes it a loud statement, and people really get excited about that, because they feel like this whole entity is on the move, and that's really what is exciting to me.
And it shows intent that we're serious about the impact we're having. We're very serious about the metrics we capture. We really want to make sure that we are making a difference. So,
And we respect the money they're giving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, their money is
that's
very,
a great
very
point.
important.
That's a great point.
And we're stewarding your
Yeah.
money.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah, we're not taking that for granted. This next question is maybe something that we can discuss with, when we speak to Global, but, and I don't know if you have it, if you're running a program, if you have a database of some sort, maybe it's just an Excel spreadsheet, and that's fine. But, the question is, where do you capture your data and how do you capture your data? And this is something that speaks to data quality, that speaks to the protocols and the processes. It's really, really important that we have a clear data flow. Does that make sense? So if I conduct a support group or I run a brigade, when is that data captured? Who captures it? On what form? And from there, from the field, where does it go? Does it get stored onto a database? Does it sort of meander around for a while and we pull pieces of paper? In other words, what is the data flow from the intervention all the way until it lands on Walter's desk to say, oh my goodness, we did this, we handed out this many tablets. What is that data flow? So it's really important.
And the process has to be very understood as well from everybody. Because what you can end up doing is have 3 or 4 people calling Walter with the same question on data, because they're looking at
Exactly.
different things or for different reasons, instead of having a singular database that.
Exactly.
So, and I know Shane's working on some of that.
So we have a database at Hope Worldwide. We've actually got 8 data capturers that work full-time. We've got 2 data supervisors, and we've got a M&E manager. So we've got a team of 12 people that all they do, morning, noon, and night, is capture, analyze. Melinda probably has a team of 20. I don't know how many. But she's got a massive team of, it's the same way as finances. Now, would you, imagine you purchase something and you say, here's the change. Yeah, but where's the receipt? Well, I don't know where the receipt is. Here's the change. Your parent support group register is the receipt that event actually took place.
Yeah.
So we have to submit that in the same way we do finances. All that paperwork is identical to the financial. So we have a whole team, like we have a finance department, we have a monitoring evaluation department that does that. So type of database. So either you have one at your project level, country level, or do we speak to Shane and Co. and say, listen, what is the data that you need that can be aggregated so that we're all speaking the same language? And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Who should have access to that database? We've seen people manipulate the database, tweak it like you would in finances. Today
Our sales.
How often should that be uploaded? Should this be a membership requirement? Not just for us, but for globally. If you carry the name Hope Worldwide, should you, and I think we'd agree that you should, upload data at least, whether it's every quarter or biannually, update the data to the global database.
And that's what we want to talk about later this afternoon, is what data should every organization, every program that wears the Hope Worldwide name, there's a confluence of certain types of data. You're going to have different measurements in brigades than you would at Siena Hospital, but there's a standard amount that everybody should report.
Absolutely.
And we really need to define that and come up with what we think that ought to be.
Yeah. A couple other questions that I don't think we need to answer right now, but how will the data be analyzed? Is that something that you do, your team does, a student from a university? Is that something that Global could invest in? And then how do we learn from the data? The purpose of data is obviously to report on it, but also to feed back to ourselves, right? we cannot manage what we cannot measure. So if the program isn't going well, how do we analyze and say, wait a minute, all that feeding we've been doing is actually not producing change? Is it the food pack? Is it the quality? Is it the frequency? Is it the dosage? What's going on? And then, really important, is have we allocated resources to monitoring and evaluation? The US government will tell you that if you haven't put 10% of your budget into monitoring and evaluation, you've sold yourself short.
Wow.
10% of a budget. Now again, we're not there yet, but I think it's just something to consider, is how are we budgeting for monitoring and evaluation? In the same way you would do it for finances, right? You need a finance team, you're going to do audits, you're spending a lot of money on audits. Monitoring and evaluation is the data side of the audit, as you have the financials. So that's just something.
And the rigor required by the donor is, obviously the amount of funding we have to allocate for monitoring.
Exactly. Yeah.
USAID is much more rigorous than American Red Cross right now.
Exactly.
Amen. So we don't need to allocate 10% for American Red Cross, but what is it? We need to allocate something for committee.
So in your proposal, you should have a line called monitoring and evaluation. Now that could be in person, that could be software, that could be a data quality audit, that could be something. But I think just make sure that it's in your budget. Now, just to end off, I want to go back to this, and Shane, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. Not pick on you. We love each other.
Mark, excuse me, in your early childhood development monitoring and evaluation, do you have is there something that you're using for entering data for height, weight, all that information that we could use for brigades?
So we're now using what's called the mid-upper arm circumference measurement, the MUAC, okay, which has now become a standardized tool. I don't particularly like it, but it's now become a global tool.
Yeah.
It's a little sort of band that you put around the mid-upper arm, and it quickly tells you whether the child is suffering from severe acute malnutrition, moderate acute malnutrition, or just is normal.
Right.
I prefer well, we don't generally use BMIs, we use a Z-score in children. I actually prefer that. It's a lot more sensitive. The other thing we do is we check the clinic record book.
Yeah.
So they plot the graph, and then we will work with the parent and say, have you noticed there's a drop off here, or your child hasn't been measured. So we're just doing a very quick mid-upper arm measurement, and I can show you that. It's really quick.
I think I'm thinking about this now. I'm thinking about Kevin and his new role as kind of the medical director. That this is something that we need to input into our program. That we have the data, but we need to change how we do it based upon what you're telling me. And Kevin understands all this, but there's got to be a way that we input this standardization into our program, so you can collect the data and we can collect the data.
I think globally now the MUAC is now the standard tool, unless you're actually a child is severely malnourished, and then they'll use a type of a
How do you
BMI.
spell that?
He's going to
MUAC.
MUAC?
Yeah, mid-upper arm circumference. It's just it's a little tape measure that you loop through, and it either shows red, orange, or green.
Yeah.
Shane did a great job last year in Robert's presentation. I forget when it was, Shane, you can remind me. I think it was October. Panama. We put together a quick sort of online form that everybody could report into. And I think Shane and the team did a great job. And you can see, apart from name and project and where you are, what it did was it gave you categories of types of programs that you're running, and you could just tick them, one or more. And then it asks the question, how many full-time staff members do you have? How many part-time members do you have? How many individual volunteers have you served this past year? Please count each individual once, even if they've served multiple times. There again, that's the definition. You're not counting them every time they come out, you're counting them once. Okay? So that's defining. And then what are the total volunteer hours served in the past year? Now, what are some of the dangers you see with this? And I'm just opening it up. How accurate do you think this information would be if you're asking it for the first time?
Not very.
Why not?
Because we don't have a system to count them accurately.
You don't have a definition of what full-time is, what part-time, you don't have definitions, I guess, maybe. Is this the only part of the report?
No, I'll show you some more in a minute, but I just want to pause there for a second. So if a volunteer comes and goes, hey kiddo, you're awesome, goes with you, and then heads out, is that a volunteer?
Is that an hour?
It could be.
Is that an
but
hour?
It's
Could
not
be.
defined.
Well, that's it. So again, this isn't a judgment or a criticism. We needed to get something out there,
Right.
and so what we did is we put together this question with some definition to ask these things. And the same applies to the total volunteer hours. No one, or very few people, capture volunteer hours. You know, the church does something. Okay, Walter did 2.5 hours, and Laurie did 3.
It's a very broad.
But, you know, it's a bit of a generalization.
Estimate.
You know.
Yeah.
So, back to Dave's question, is this something that should be incorporated in our regular capturing as an output, rather than as
Yes.
anecdotal, let's think this through, more or less, thumb suck, 50 hours, you know?
If you know that you have to report this on a quarterly basis as part of your standard operating procedure,
Then you'll keep it.
then you will keep it.
Exactly.
If we say, in 2 months, Robert's got to do a talk, let's hurry up and get some data, it's probably going to be extremely inaccurate.
So, and by the way, I might have contributed to anything that's wrong with that, don't just blame Shane.
No, I'm not blaming anyone.
Okay.
I'm saying we were all involved in this development.
We had to do it really good.
Yeah, he said that, they were just scrambling to put that.
Oh, we totally were scrambling, and it's making me not want to do it again. No, because we're trying to get it again, and we haven't made these definitions. But the other
do it
thing
the right
is,
way.
here's what's interesting. We, as the churches, we were measuring how many projects did you have, blah, blah, blah. And then
How
we
long
all
were they?
sort of reacted to that. And so we're gonna maybe have to change the culture a little bit in the chapters perhaps. I'm just guessing, places where we don't like all these, it's about the heart I serve, why are we, so I think what you're saying is really, really important, and we're gonna have to have some good talking points as to why, which you've given us, but we have to.
But I think it's like I think Walter was saying. To me, it's a no-brainer. We want to measure the impact.
Right.
So how do we sell that
How do we sell?
perspective
Exactly.
in that paradigm?
Right.
Well, it's interesting, Mark, we're talking about standardization. He's just totally convicted me. All you guys are. We've been doing brigades for 10 years. You know how many volunteer hours we've captured? Zero.
Right.
The only time I do it is if the kid sends me a thing from their school, I have to,
Yeah, you gotta.
because they get credit for it.
But you could-
So I count
You could
their
do some
travel
rough
time,
estimates.
I count their,
You could figure that out,
40
the
hours,
number of people.
No, we can't, but just
More or less.
the whole idea is
It's not
that.
a statistic.
What the
it's
heck
not-
do you think it's-
I wasn't.
It's not a statistic.
Make sure to
You can
subtract the time they
decide.
sleep.
I think Shane's gonna.
Well, I just want to recognize that we're understanding this to be important. That's part of the reason why we want to do a volunteer health study. That's kind
Yeah.
of like a step one
Mm-hmm.
to something that is going to take 5 or 6 steps.
Mm-hmm.
And because really, there's a lot of opportunity here for us to capture this data and understand it. Specifically, in the U.S., there's a specific classification for a specialized volunteer that you can actually attribute to part of your financials, because if they're a medical doctor, each state has a rate at which they value that volunteer hour.
Oh,
So,
wow.
we're seeing these opportunities, and I think, as we build, it's good to keep this in mind. So
Now-
I appreciate it.
Let me ask you this question: why would we measure volunteer hours? What's the relevance of it? So, remember, we are only going to measure what is useful to us. I could measure how many hairs are on Walter's head, but great, so I have that information. So the question is, why would we measure volunteer hours? So do you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
So sometimes we've got 100 indicators, we're going to measure all this, but only 20 of them or 5 of them are actually of use at all. you know, how many times the child smiled. Okay, well, that's nice to know, but I mean, so the question is, whatever we decide on, and this is maybe the discussion, we've got to agree that this is actually useful to somebody.
Doesn't that have to do with defining what we do and who we are? Because we bill ourselves as a volunteer organization, so it seems to me that would be one of the primary things that we would.
So if we said 5,000 volunteer hours, what would that do to you?
Nothing.
I'm just saying.
To me, it didn't have any value, or I would
It
have
did-
recorded
it
it.
didn't
I mean,
to
that's
us
how I
at
feel
all,
about
so
it.
we were like,
Because I'm not thinking about the
We have so
corporation and
many
what
other
lends
things
itself
to
to the
count that are-
So
corporation.
for you, for
that seem
instance,
more
it might-
valuable.
but for global, they may say, last year we had 200,000 volunteer hours. This year it's 300,000. What does that imply? You know, more people are getting involved, getting excited, there's engagement, more people are, you know, really putting their heart as disciples. They understand the value of serving the poor. Anyway, so it depends on the audience, it depends on the stakeholders. So I think we've got to decide what are those indicators, global indicators that we're going to.
Maybe something capture those?
Yeah, we do. And one reason is because we claim that 2/3 of the time spent on a volunteer corps is spent in service hours. So we have to prove that because
You've got to, exactly, for you
because-
that's critical. Yeah.
yes, because it used to be that the kids would go on youth corps and you know half the time they'd be goofing around. And so if we're serious about volunteering, then it has to be, we say it's 2/3. And so we have to prove it.
Well, there's a great example of the need for that.
You gotta define service too.
Exactly.
This
Right.
legitimize your existence as an organization and
Right.
selling to other corporate
Exactly.
entities that
Yeah.
we legitimately can connect you
Yeah.
to the community.
And that's at the output level. We may want to measure this over time. And if we start seeing volunteer hours dropping in 2020, what does that say? Wait a minute, what's going on here, you know?
Or we're measuring finally, and we're,
What's that?
or we're actually reporting real data.
Right.
Or now we're actually
Instead of
reporting.
making-
Dave, did you want to say
That's
something?
probably gonna happen.
Typically,
Did you want to say
Working
something?
Yeah, I was
7
gonna-
hours of
I think
volunteering a
one, I
day.
think, you know,
Yeah.
like the value of data with FEMA, very specifically, volunteer hours, that number that Shane mentioned, at $24.69 per hour value in the US, they can take that off their deductible for insurance. So if we go volunteer and help somebody do, you know, muck out their house, they're actually saving money on insurance. And they don't have to, it applies towards their deductible. So when we're out there doing that kind of stuff, it can actually add value to the people we're serving.
Now, what if, Dave, that information was not accurate and FEMA actually audited you on your volunteer hours?
The good news is it's FEMA, so you don't have to worry about that. But, yeah, and
But
that's
you
a
get my
valuable
point.
question.
You get my point.
And the things we've done last year in the fall when we were doing that, we actually reported the time we were at their house. And the FEMA, the voluntary, they have all kinds of people who are asking that question. The other point I wanted to make is, as long as we are doing this, we need to fully understand that our data collectors outside of the USAID funded folks are probably gonna be volunteers, so they need to have the value of what this data is. I spent a lot of time watching young firefighters going, this means nothing to me. Why, who cares? It meant something up here, but if it doesn't mean something down here, the person that is collecting and inputting the data,
Right.
you know.
Totally.
We've gotta make sure it's simple
Totally.
enough, and our metrics are simple enough that at their level, they're understanding the value of that technology.
We experience the same with our community workers. They're like, I'm serving the poor, I'm healing this, and I'm doing that. Why am I filling out all these forms?
Yes.
And some of it, unfortunately, is made up. We've caught people sitting at home
Yeah.
filling in forms. I visited Terry, and she was really sick, and I did this, and we phoned Terry. And when was the last time the field worker was out there? Oh, it was about 5 months ago.
Yeah.
So, all I'm saying, it's important. The other question is, a volunteer paid, stipended, or not? So we need to define that. You know, let me get to this.
Marcus,
Oh,
real
sorry,
quick
go
right there. When you were talking about like the 200,000 volunteer hours, it's interesting how we make that jump in our minds from the quantitative to the qualitative. Therefore, our impact was X. But that really, in reality, there is no evidence at all.
Right.
And Duke just having suffered a $250 million whistleblowing, I don't know if you guys knew that, from research being done badly. Yeah, the largest payout in history was
Wow.
paid by Duke because of bad data. So we've got to be careful.
I just want to get to.
Wow.
I want to ask you a question, and again, we take responsibility for these questions. What is the problem with these questions?
Well, it's too far away, I can't see it.
Oh, so that is a very good.
That's very good.
Talking real loud here,
Right up the bottom.
Do you want me to read them for you?
Yeah, great.
Okay. So the first question says, how many total beneficiaries have you served this past year? That's a good question, right? Please count each time you serve a beneficiary as one time. If you serve the beneficiary 5 times, please count that as 5.
Yeah,
No,
no,
said not to do that.
that's
Yeah.
redundant, is it not?
We're not counting how many people we've served, we're counting how many times
How
we've
many
served.
touches? How many touches?
But also,
How many touches?
what does it mean that we serve that
So
beneficiary?
there's a couple of issues here with this. We haven't defined served.
Right.
Okay. Now again, we were trying to get. We sort of understand what served means, right?
Sort of.
Now, it could be a 20-minute pat on the back, right? Or it could be a 3-hour training, or it could be a 1-week seminar.
Right.
Yeah.
Could be a smile.
Well, it could be a smile. We have this analogy of driving with a van down the road and you throw out food,
Right.
and then you take a picture and you count how many people caught the food. Is that served? So we need to define what served means. Now, obviously, for disaster relief and for brigades, served has a special definition, and that's why the protocol. But okay, so that's served hasn't been necessarily defined. What's the other problem here? I think somebody mentioned
The definition?
it. Okay, what's the issue?
Serve.
Okay, so if you serve the same beneficiary 5 times, please count that as 5.
That's.
On the previous page,
Yeah.
it said if you serve something, how many volunteers we served
That's,
past
yeah.
year.
It's double dipping, isn't it?
It's double
It's
counting,
Double dipping, yeah.
right?
Well, it's actually
Double
5
dip,
times.
yeah.
Well, 5 times.
We call it,
Or triple.
we stop at 2, we just call it double
Yeah,
counting. Okay. So the problem is now, we're telling people that if they were served once, count them as 1, but if they serve them 5 times, count them as 5 different people. Do you see the problem?
It's not
So
the
now
number
we've got
of
these
beneficiaries.
massive numbers that Robert is confidently announcing to the world,
No.
and some of the programs may not have actually got the right data based on this.
Was that written like that on the survey that you guys?
Well,
Yeah,
I know.
They actually
Yes.
have.
I did have trouble completing that whole thing, just.
I think that I
sent
sent, we have always asked US volunteers that exact question, not beneficiaries, but volunteers. How many volunteers have you had, for each, exactly that wording, so probably you guys just copied what we have always asked the US volunteers for years, which is totally off base.
Yeah.
So our numbers are gonna tank.
So what we probably find, okay, and this is the honest truth, this year, our numbers are gonna drop.
Yes.
Our numbers are gonna drop as we get more accurate, and that's fine. But I'm just giving you a heads up that these are some of the things we need to look at. And then, as Dave mentioned, what is your budget? And so these are the questions we asked all the countries around the world. And I think they're good questions, they need to be tweaked. Staff, volunteers, beneficiaries, and budget. Now those are the ones we want to keep, as long as they've been refined and defined and refined. So those are the things. The last thing I want to mention, we're going to go into the log frames now, and I've had a chance to look at, I think most of them. I don't think all of them, and I noticed and again, this is a generalization, so please don't take this personally. The activities and outputs for the most part are awesome. I think where we start getting a little bit, we struggle, is in the outcomes. So as the disaster relief guys present, just, let's be sensitive about this, but let's help each other make sure as we focus on evaluation that we are looking at those outcomes and making sure that we have the indicators we need to measure the outcomes. And the tools, maybe they're aspirational now. In other words, we will do a survey to make sure that people are disaster ready. Okay, is that survey tool ready? Is it available? Maybe it's something that's already out there. But I want us, as we look at that in the context of what we've looked at, can we measure outputs? And I think most of us can say, and then how do we ensure that we measure outcomes? Because that's where we want to go to.
Yeah.
And this may take some time. So I'm really excited that we're heading in this direction, and we'll help each other get there. But anyway, that is, welcome, bro. It's great to have you with us. We'll talk some more. And I know Nadine's been able to record this, but you'll get access to this. But we'll talk a little bit more about all of this. Any questions? I know we need to wrap this up. Is everybody overwhelmed, totally intimidated?